sometimes just have a bit of faith and share and see what happens. Can't be worse than just keeping it in your head. And then start to surround yourself with trusted, because this was something when I was in the UK, we didn't really talk to therapists or coaches or things like that. And this is something I feel like you should be talking to therapists, not because something's wrong. Just literally, you should have somebody who that's their skill set. That's what they do. You should have a coach that you talk to because you want to make sure that there's no hidden trauma or there's no bandages that you're putting on top, so that you can show up as your best self for your loved ones. So that should be something you should be investing in. And that's for me, one of the reasons I wrote the book is like, same way we go to the gym and we spend so much money on physical fitness, is like, you should have a therapist that you talk to, not because anything's wrong, but because you want to be a better person. You want to make sure that you're not just having conversations with yourself. You should have a coach that you talk to where when you want to take action and behavior change, that shit is not easy. Can't do it on your own.
Hello, and welcome to the Mindset and Self-Mastery Show. I'm your host, Nick McGowan, and today on the show, I have Chinazom. Chinazom, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing very well, Nick. Very excited to be here to talk with you.
Yeah, I'm excited that you're here. I know we've had to move things around a little bit, so I appreciate you and your PR firm being a little flexible. And I know time difference-wise, at first I thought time difference-wise was different, and I could hear it in your accent, but you're actually in the States, right?
I am in the States, and I confuse people a lot because of the English accent, but no, I'm in Maryland, so we're on the same time zone. But I think the person who reached out to you, she's in the UK, so that might have been what confused you.
Maybe, yeah, that, and I saw some of your videos. One of my friends is from, I think, right outside of London, and okay. He's been here for 15 years. Maybe even a little longer, but he still has the accent. So people ask him where he's from. He's like, oh, Pittsburgh. I'm like, come on, really? Yeah. But hey, man, why don't you get us started here? Why don't you tell us what you do for a living and what's one thing that most people don't know about you that's maybe a little odd or bizarre?
Okay. So I'm a high performance leadership coach, and I'm also a mental fitness. I love talking about mental fitness. I'm what I call a coaching strategy consultant. And one thing that people might not know is I love to dance. Only my close friends really know that. And I love to dance to Afrobeat music. And my son, now he loves to dance as well. So if you ever walk past our house, you'll see us in the evening just dancing around while we're making dinner and getting ready to eat. So that's one thing.
That's a pretty good thing. Is there anything that's a little odd or different other than dancing?
The other one thing is I've rowed across the English Channel in a little canoe boat. A friend managed to talk me and her husband to be part of a group that rowed across the English Channel for charity.
That's
and
cool.
That was pretty crazy.
Wow. How long was that ride?
8 hours and 36 minutes of pure joy.
Now I feel like you're lying to me.
Our bums were not working for many hours afterwards. Just the sensation had gone.
Oh, I bet. Wow. So what was the charity that you guys did that for?
I forget about it. It was a charity for young kids to help them how to kind of learn how to sail boats and also learn about boat building. Yeah. But I forget the exact name of it now. It was in East London.
Okay. Now, have you ever done anything like that before? Or have you even just rode on machines at the gym? Or was that your first time? You're like, all right, fuck it, give me an oar.
That was my first time. I was into triathlon, and that was how the friend managed to convince me that, you're into triathlon.
You're fit.
Come and sit in a rowing boat and row to France and come back.
Wow. So, oh, so you went the entire trip there and back. So was it like 4 hours plus to get there and 4 hours back?
What we did was we went there 3/4 of the way because we couldn't land in France because you have to have a machine in your boat, and it was just a normal boat. So we had to then turn around and come back to Dover and row all the way back. Wow. So was that before you moved to Maryland, I assume, or did you go back? Okay, cool. Yeah, long before I moved to the US.
Okay.
2017 or 16.
Okay, cool. And before we hit record, you were telling me that you got to the States in 2019. And I'd asked, have you gone out and done all the touristy things and all that? And you said it was kind of it feels like you've only been there for about a year because of all COVID. So you had your wife had a baby, and then you guys got stuck in your house, and
the rest of the world. Yep, we became enforced prisoners. in the house.
Yeah. But you'd also said that you changed careers when you left the UK and came here. So talk to us a little bit about that. Give us some background on that story.
So yeah, I kind of went through like crazy transitions. It was all just around the time before I met my wife. I stumbled onto something called performance psychology, which I really, really loved. And someone let me start working with their athletes, and I was enjoying it, doing it. And then my wife said to me, why don't you give this a go and give it a try? So 2018, I left my job and started doing this performance psychology. And my wife she'd grown up in the US, and I'd moved her over to the UK. She hated the weather. She'd always been complaining about it. So we started thinking, okay, we'll look at moving to the US. But then while we were looking, my wife became pregnant. So it became a little bit more, okay, we need to get this done now. Otherwise we're not going to move. So we took the decision in 2019, we were going to move to Maryland while my wife was 6 months pregnant.
Jeez.
And I was just, I think about a year into this new career, which literally there was no kind of blueprint of how to do it. So I was still kind of making it up as I went along. So then coming to the US, with a 6 month pregnant wife, and I didn't know when I would be able to work, and having to start a new career. So it was a lot of huge transitions all in one go. And then the pandemic hit in 2000. So I think my son was born October 2019. We'd been here for 3-4 months. And then by February the next year, the pandemic hit. So that was another something we'd not planned for at all.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I guess we could get into conspiracy theories about how the government may have planned for that, but that's a whole different topic, different conversation. We won't go there. One of my favorite questions, and I'm sure the audience knows this, is how did you manage your mindset through that? And I think of those sort of transitions, not only moving to the States, you have a pregnant wife, you just had a newborn, and a couple months later in a brand new country, brand new state, getting used to all of this, you're then locked in your house in a brand new career. I know it's one big loaded ass question, but break that down for us. How did you manage your mindset through that? And you feel free to take it piece by piece if you want.
I might have to take it piece by piece because now when you ask me that question, it's just like, how the hell did I get through that period? I mean, up until that period, I'd been working with athletes. So I'd started working with performance psychology, what's required for you to perform under pressure. And before I moved to the States, I started I just went on a lot of long walks, trying to prepare my mind for what's it going to be like? What are the things that scare you? There were too many things that scared me actually. So I was like, okay, just start going through some scenario analysis of just going through scenarios of what would you do when you get there and what's going to help you with your mindset.
Okay.
So when I got there, I kind of realized I'm going to have to practice what I preach, because if I'm preaching this is how you do pre-performance routines and this is how you perform under pressure, I'm going to be under pressure. So I need to I need to practice what I preach. So that was the first thing of trying to understand what would help in my mindset, what would help when things weren't going my way. Or as I like to say, when you get your ass handed to you, how do you take the lesson and then decide, okay, you still need to keep moving forward.
Yeah.
But I won't lie to you. It was, that you can prepare for something, and then when you actually hit the reality, those are two different things. So when I actually became a dad, that was when it was a lot tougher, the lack of sleep, becoming a dad for the first time. Throw in the pandemic, it was it was just crazy. But then what I learned was the ability to really prioritize, because I feel like before I didn't understand what prioritization was until my son came along. And when you have very little time, you actually realize, okay, what's really, really important, because I've only got 2 hours to do stuff. Yeah. Wow. Because in the beginning, my wife is the one who was working. I was still waiting to be allowed to work. So I spent a lot of time with my son. And that was really a bit that really helped me learn how to manage my mindset, was really prioritizing and then getting to spend the other time with my son and I had to create my own joy. Yeah. Because I couldn't make friends. I couldn't even go in contact with people. So I had to find things to create joy out of little things, in that period. So it was challenging, but kind of got through that period. And then the other bit was learning to be creative. And I kind of learned that thing is every time you got your ass handed to you, there's a lesson to be learned there. And how can you pivot and change and adapt from what you did? And what I realized is no matter any situation, there's always a lesson and there's always a good thing to pick up from that. Yeah. So having to pick myself up so many times, I learned a lot about self-compassion. I feel like before everyone said resilience is you got to keep pushing and keep pushing no matter what. I think in the pandemic, that's where people kind of learned that there's a lot that's outside your control.
Yeah.
And the best way, if you want to keep pushing and get through it, and maintain your mindset, is you've got to be kind to yourself, especially when you have setbacks.
Yeah, and that's so true for no matter if it's during a pandemic or just a crazy ass time. Like everything could be calm right now, and in 2 or 3 days you could have a big project at work, or you could have some major setback with your health or anything like that. And I think a lot of people are still struggling through different traumas that they've had through the pandemic, or things that have been brought up from the pandemic. And what you're hitting on are all core pieces to all of this, but let's actually get into some of the dark moments where you felt like, fuck, am I actually going to be able to do this? Like, how do I do this? And how do I actually get through the mental fitness? And give us some of the tactics that you use that you can look back to now and go, well, if I didn't fucking do that, things may have been really, really bad.
That's a good one, actually. I mean, I think some of the dark moments would have had to be early on when my son was born, and then the stress of not having a job. My wife had just started working. We were trying to navigate her working, not having any support. So having to learn how to be new parents in that new environment while she's working in a new country. So there was a kind of like a lot of dark times, and the only person I could really count on at the time was my wife. So when things weren't going so well and we were arguing, it was those were times where it was like really dark. And then all of a sudden I came over thinking I'm a performance psychologist working with athletes, but there was no fucking sports for starters. So that took that out of the equation. So it was like in that dark period, I was like, have I really fucked up here? Like, who am I kidding? There's no clients to work with. I'm arguing with my wife all the time. Money's all of a sudden going to become an issue. And I think in the darkest moments, that's when I had to say, you have to practice what you preach. So if you were preaching this and you believe it, then, well, this is an opportunity to test it out. So I had to then kind of realize that my wife is going through her own things, and I had to learn to find joy and solace in myself first and make sure that I was okay and not blaming it on my wife, putting it on my wife. And slowly when I started doing that, we started to get along better and kind of just accept that we were both going through a tough situation and how can we make it work. And also just pivoting. Because she was the one who said to me, okay, right, you wanted to do this. You thought this was going to happen. You don't have any athletes to work with. Who do you have to work with? What other vantage points? So I didn't get so fixed in identity, like I'm this and this is all I can do. So I then had to start thinking, okay, who else can I work with? Okay, there's still people in everyday work doing this who have to go out and perform. And then luckily I found a company who through Zoom, I was able to like do coaching through that to workers. Cool. And then slowly but surely just started coming out of it and things started to get better.
Wow. So let's look at those, maybe the moments after the dark moments where you had that like, oh shit, well, I need to do things a bit differently. I don't want to keep arguing. I don't want money to be a problem. I have zero fucking sleep. And again, if it's not with a pandemic, I think people will experience that within work or just having another child or just being stressed out. And there's just a lot of things that make people anxious at times. And I think that a lot of it stems from our childhood and just traumas that we've had in the past. But did you feel any of that start to come up? Anything that was older, any traumas that you've had from your childhood that started to like compound and really give you that negative self-talk to tell you like, you're not going to fucking be able to do this. You've made the wrong decisions. And then how you can actually switch away from that and be like, all right, I hear you. I'm not going to buy into it, but that's a you conversation. Just like with the audience, when they have these conversations internally, you talk to your wife, your partner, whoever, but that's that you conversation to go, all right, I need to decide to do this. So what did that look like for you in those moments to be able to do that?
That's a great question you actually asked, because it was reflecting on coming through that period. And when I say the dark moments, it didn't just happen overnight. That was probably a period of at least a year, if not longer, of going through that and trying to find your feet. And I call it no man's land where I was going through, because I'd left a career which was all stability. I always had income, and I knew, I'd worked in that career for 20 years. To then come over here, I realized like there were two big things: your identity of who you think you are, and then the narrative that you tell your head. And weirdly enough, the pandemic was a good period to just have that, just be on my own, to actually listen to the nonsense that I was telling myself in my head. And I'm really into mindfulness. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but for me, you don't have to just be sitting there meditating. It's actually being able to give yourself a bit of space from your thoughts and listen to either journaling or when you're going for a walk, and actually listen to the crap that's sometimes going on in your head, and like, okay, that's actually not me. So how do I want to engage in that? And that no man's land was actually a beautiful thing, because it made me realize there were so many identities I had in my head, which I don't even know where I'd got them from. So I was like, okay, so I have a bit of freedom now. I can actually do whatever I want to do that really I'm passionate about. And once I got over that, I'm not supposed to be a man who provides for my family or all the other fill in the blanks. Once I had that freedom where I knew that my wife trusted me and she trusted my instincts, then it was so freeing to then, as I started coming out, you take risk in a different way, because you're like, well, there was a weird thing coming out of the pandemic. I had nothing to lose. I was already starting zero. And it was so freeing, because then that narrative, I realized you feel like if you don't have space from your thoughts, you feel like that's you. But actually, when you get a bit of space, you're like, okay, that's just my survival brain that keeps telling me stuff. I can put that to there for something. That's another brain that always wants everyone to like you. Or okay, I don't need that for now. And then you can start to be more intentional. What narrative do I want in this period? And what new identities, because I don't like to say identity, because it's a kind of flowing thing. So you should be able to flow with it.
That's interesting. You also touch on something that has really been on my heart and my mind over the past few months, about how a lot of people think that life should be a certain way, or it shouldn't be a certain way. Like you shouldn't do this thing, and they're just instantly judging or what have you, because they believe that you should do it some way. And we do it to ourselves, where we 100%. Think, oh, well, I moved here, it should look this way. And being able to separate from that, the should and shouldn't, is just a whole bunch of bullshit. Like, it's not real. It doesn't come from somewhere specific always. It can, but like you were saying, like you're like, I don't know where the fuck it all came from. Like, it's a conglomeration of just a bunch of shit that's like, well, it should be this way or it shouldn't be that way. So how did you actually separate yourself? And let's break that down a little bit so we can give some useful advice for people to actually go, all right, I need to get away from the should and shouldn't bullshit, and being able to separate so that they can be mindful and hear the stuff coming at them, but go, no, that's not right. Here's what I'm going to do with it.
I mean, I love the point you just mentioned about what should and shouldn't, because that causes so much heartache for so many people. And it's like, for instance, when I came over, I'm supposed to be this performance psychologist now working with athletes. And then that started causing so much pain. And then my wife is like, okay, where did that come from? Why are you now locked with this new identity? So I think for me, like breaking it down, if you actually step back and start to think, what's the things causing you pain and where did these identity come from? And then a lot of that was, as you raised the point of in your childhood, I'm from a Nigerian family, being the firstborn son for my mom, you're kind of, there's expectations on you. And then you don't realize those expectations have been guiding you all your life, the type of career you choose, the way you approach risk. And having those, I used to go on a lot of walks. My son, I had to push him in the pram. So those walks were really good periods to actually, that's how I started to realize the identities I'd created in my head. And almost the identities that had imprisoned me. Why, when I come to a certain situation, I'll almost by default do a certain thing. And one of the things I started to break down was whenever I came into a new opportunity, I started to notice that I'd always look for what could go wrong before I look for what could go right. And so that was one thing I had to start, okay, well, why do I do that? And then I started changing it. Okay, next time, let's look for what can go right, because we know we're already expert at planning for what can go wrong. Let's look for what can go right first, look at all those possibilities. And then, okay, if we need to, we can plan afterwards if things change. And that was a big shift for me that started to change that. And then during that period, I also had issues like family issues earlier on in my marriage, which had impacted me. And actually having some therapy at that time kind of helped uncover a lot more of those narratives and identity. And just talking with someone like a trusted person that wasn't my wife or wasn't someone else, it was very, very helpful to, there's something about when you say something out, then all of a sudden you're like, Jesus, that belief I've been carrying in my head.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how freeing and uplifting that was to help to just feel like shaking certain things off. And the way I kind of view it, when I came out of that, I kind of realized that there's only certain things that you should really care about, and the rest of it, it should not be allowed you to put yourself in a prison. And that period, that was when I was able to like let go of a lot of the identities and change the narratives.
What an important step. Think about if you didn't do that, how wild the rest of this would have been. Yeah. And for those people that are listening to the episode, they didn't see his face. For those that are going to watch this on YouTube with that, yeah, like that's a tough pill to swallow at that point, because if you don't walk down that path, and that's something that I like to be able to talk, even coaching clients about, or just friends and family, of like, well, if you don't change this thing, what the fuck happens from there? Like, we get it. If you change it, things could be better, things could be this, but what if you fucking don't? What happens at that point? So did you think about that? Was that one of those things that was kind of did that spur you on a bit of like, fuck, if I don't change this, if I don't get out of this rut or this loop, then things are going to go in a different direction?
I didn't think about that in that moment, but I'd already thought about that before I started my journey, before I decided to like quit my job. And it was a moment where, and then I'd been partying for the weekend, and I came back, and then I looked at myself in the mirror and just thinking, I didn't like my job. And then I flashed to myself, 10 or 15 years later with a family. And I was like, kind of saw myself. I was like, I didn't want to be one of those people that didn't try out of fear and then say, oh, but I did all this for my family, and that's why I kept doing a miserable job. So that was already the spur. It was like, that reality was too much for me. I was like, I couldn't live with myself if I didn't, at least, I don't care if I fucked up and failed at it, but at least if I tried, then at least I can live with myself. But I knew that I'd be lying to myself if I didn't try. So that's what spurred me to leave my career and start this new. So I was already in that mindset of, you just have to be honest with yourself. So when I'm in the middle of that, when you're having those conversations with yourself, when you see a clear truth, you have to have the humility to accept it and say, okay, and call out your own bullshit and do something about it. So I was already in that mindset, if you'd say.
That's good. Let's talk about the clients that you work with and the people that go through that. How do you help them get through it on their own? Because you and I both know we can say a lot of shit to different people. We can make suggestions. We can say, I've seen this work with other people, and they go, that's cool. Fuck off. I'm going to do it a different way. And you're like, all right, you just paid me to help you, but fine. So in those moments, talking through with your clients, how do you guide them through that? And think about from the audience perspective of somebody that's listening going, yeah, how do you guide me through that?
Luckily, I mean, the clients I work with, they already want to do the work. And I feel that's the biggest thing. It doesn't matter what I say or do. If you're not willing to do the work, then good point. Nothing's going to happen. And there's one client in particular I'm working with now. They're once they're willing to do the work, then it's down for me to just ask them those questions. And I call it going below the surface. Let's go below the surface to actually see what's that real underlying emotion that's driving this. And then it's up to me to build that trust, to show that I'm there to really, to here to support you. And then once we go below the surface, then is keep that safe space for them to actually see, this is what's driving you. This is what's causing that issue. And I find that when the people are ready to do the work, once they have clarity on what that is, then the rest, they just say, right, okay, that's enough. I'm not having any more of that. This is what we're going to do. And then you just watch it like magic unfold in front of your eyes, where they just start putting things into action.
So going below the surface, even for yourself, let's take a little bit of a step back, because you'd mentioned about the expectations of being, I guess, the first or only one in your family, being the first boy or being the only boy even. I'm the only son of my mom, but I'm not the only son of my dad. He had somebody else.
Yeah, my dad has 10 kids, but I'm the only son of my mom. So my mom has 3 kids.
Okay.
But there's he has another 3 boys, so there's 4 of us.
Oh, it sounds like he's got a whole lot of kids. That's a whole lot. But having the expectations, every culture has things that are different for them. every region, even here in the States, there's different regions that have different expectations of people. So if you take that step back and go below the surface, how did that affect you with your new business and your new family? And how do you see that? How did you see that working within what you were trying to build and trying to create for yourself?
So how did the cultural expectations affect me when I was, that was a great question. Because actually when I came over to Maryland, what I didn't realize is that there was quite a big, I'm from Nigeria, so there's quite a big Nigerian community here. And I used to always remember when I would go to parties or events and everyone would be coming up, I'm the new person that's just come over from the UK. They want to try and help me. And then I'd explain to them the career that I was trying to do. I want to be a performance psychologist and help people with their mindset. And everyone would just look at me like, what the hell is what the hell is he talking about? And I remember one particular person, we're now friends, so I hope he's okay with me sharing the story, where I literally spent 45 minutes trying to explain to him what I did, and he didn't get it. And then at the end, he was like, okay, so you work in finance, you want to work in finance. And I was just so defeated at the end. I said to my wife, maybe I should just go back and get a job back, project manager in a finance company or investment. I was so defeated by that. Fast forward, we come out of the pandemic, and then all of a sudden, Wellbeing, everybody now knows about Wellbeing.
Mm-hmm.
The first party we went to, he came running across to talk to me about well-being and mindset coaching and everything. And I was just like, what the hell happened? Like, how did that? So I did struggle when I first came over, where I could see all the things like, what is this guy talking about? Like, your husband's not, I used to see the looks they would give my wife, like, your husband's not serious. Like, does he realize he's got a kid? He needs to get a job that actually pays money. And one thing I have to thank my wife for, she never ever I don't know whether she had the doubts inside, but she never ever showed any doubt to me. And that's where that kept me like, okay, if she believes in me, I'll keep going at this. And I know that we'll find a way through it. Mm-hmm. But it did teach me about, because I'm from Nigeria. I don't know about the American culture, but Nigeria, people always want to tell you about yourself. They want to tell you this is what you should be doing, and this is what is expected of you. And that taught me a little bit of not to take that on board, because I had to learn through that period to thanks for your viewpoint, thanks for your opinion, put it to one side and keep having faith in what I was doing.
Yeah, that can be difficult to be able to actually separate from that. And it's interesting because there are different pockets of the country that there are families that are like that. I have some friends, even people that are in my family, where their parents were like, this is how you need to do these things. You need to be this way because this is what we were. I was actually having a conversation with my brother recently. My brother's 5 years younger than me, and my sister's 8 years younger than me. So they're just different, major differences that we've had. But those two went to college. I never went to college. Okay. Quick version, I had a conversation with a counselor in high school, and she was like, well, you're an art student and a musician. We can get you in art school or music school, but you're not going to make any money. I was like, okay, I'm out. I was like, I'm not going to, why go do that? But my brother and I were having a conversation recently about him going to school and how we were all taught that you need to go to college because our parents were taught you go to college, you get a good job, you have a career, and you're sustainable and secure for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Millennials, Gen Z, etc. It's just not that case at all. But they were still like, this is how you're supposed to do these things. And different people will kind of push that on you. So were there any tips or tricks that you have of being able to kind of separate from that and understand, like, I can appreciate when somebody's giving me advice, but fuck off in a nice way?
Well, I think that was like the last question of almost from that conversation I had with that guy where he said, you should go and do finance. And I was getting a lot of advice from people in there. Look, you've done this particular career for 20 years. Like, what are you thinking? Like, this is not the time to start switching careers. You have a family. There was loads and loads of that advice. And it's like, that's where you really have to trust your instinct.
Yeah.
And it's very, very hard to trust your instinct. And I also feel like you need to meet good people along the way, because I actually did try to apply for one of those jobs. I tried to apply for a job at Amazon. To be a project manager in finance, investment or finance, something. And I'll never forget the recruiter. he spent like 45 minutes talking to me and telling me why I shouldn't take the job. And I remember thinking, does this guy just think I'm crap or not going to be good enough? But he started explaining to me, like, you've gone so far in your career to make this change for a reason.
Yeah.
Like, you will be miserable if you take this job. Like,
Nice.
and I'll never forget that conversation, because literally a month or two after that conversation, I finally got a job as a coach on a platform, which I didn't even know existed. But I loved that conversation because I feel if that had been someone else and they'd put my CV forward, I had gone through the interviews, me and you might not be having this conversation now.
Yeah. Wow. That goes back to imagine if you didn't make the change.
I know.
Imagine if you did that and that recruiter wasn't like, hold up, I can see more here, you know, and wasn't just pushing you to get the job for him to make whatever, a couple $100 because he sent over a candidate. Wow, what a crazy thing.
You just actually, as you said that, there's probably two critical things. Like, if I hadn't made the decision to still push ahead and come to the US, because when I found out my wife was pregnant, it was such a crazy move to make, where by the time we were moving over with a 6-month pregnant wife, all through that decision, part of my brain was just like, what the hell are you doing? Like, literally, what is your plan? And even as we were getting on the plane, I'll never forget where I had this most, I call it excitified. I was so excited, but so terrified, because thinking, I don't even have a work permit. I'm going somewhere where I don't even have a permit to work, and my wife's about to have a kid. So if I hadn't made that decision, well, I don't know if I'd be here talking to you. And also, if that recruiter hadn't have talked me out of putting my CV forward for the job, I would have probably not be doing this for sure. So
wow,
those are critical junctures, I think.
Yeah, big time. Like, if you had to take something away from that you could give to somebody else, what's that thing that you would give to somebody else from that? It
would have to be that, well, for the first one, choosing to come to the US is like, when you feel that excited and terrified feeling all at the same time in your stomach, that's a good sign. Because before, I used to always run away from that sign. I'll be like, no, this means you're about to do something crazy or stupid. But I've now started to, like, when I get that feeling, I kind of like, okay, that means I'm on the right path. So pushing forward. And I think what I took away from it was like, trusting your instincts. And there's some bits where you're just going to have to keep pushing. You can't see the light, but you have to just keep pushing and trusting your instincts that you've made that right decision.
Wow. Yeah. And those aren't things that you'd be able to tell in those moments. It's something you'd have to be able to look back on and see how that all worked out. So now you're in your career, you've got a wife and a baby, and you've been in the States for a bit, but you've also written a book. So tell us a little bit about your book.
Yeah, the book is called Real Talk, and it's written primarily for men, but it's actually men and women, because it's just about mental fitness. And I wrote the book predominantly from what I saw happening during the pandemic, where getting to coach different people, I kind of realized all of a sudden well-being it became at the forefront of everyone's mind. And I kind of saw this shift and pivot that was happening. Coming out of the pandemic, I was like, how can I put that in a story format so that people, because I kind of also saw that when we came out of the pandemic, everyone wanted to go back to normal. Let's go back to like just busy and pretend that period never happened. And I was like, no. There was a lot of great revelation that we had in that period, that everyone has to juggle so many different things. Because like before, you put on your suit, you come to work, and you just have this suit on, and that's all everyone sees. All of a sudden, when I look into your house, I'm like, oh my God, you've got kids, you've got all these other things that you have to juggle. So how are you managing it? How are you coping? So I wanted to write a book that kind of forced people to start having that conversation. And I created 4 characters where there were friends who basically were having the first conversation after the pandemic, and then they started sharing with each other, and they found out that all of them had been struggling, but they hadn't told each other about it. And then a sad thing was one of their friends that tried to commit suicide. So it was like trying to get people to let's start having those real conversations, and really trying to focus on our mental fitness. Because I feel like, for me, that's the biggest thing. If you have your well-being, you should really try to understand everything about it and how to take care of it. Yeah, that was it.
Wow. That sounds like such a probably more accurate and truthful story for most people if they actually sat down and had the conversations. Like if they were sitting down with friends and stepped back and said, all right, well, here we are in 2023. How did you fare through the pandemic? There are probably more of those conversations where people were like, well, I almost committed suicide, or this happened. Personally, for me, I started to walk down the path of a divorce, and it was one of the most beautiful things ever. I didn't get married to get a divorce, but I didn't get a divorce to die. And I remember walking through all of that and having to be stuck in a condo and being like, all right, well, you and I need to fucking talk about things and work through this shit. And not everybody I knew about that, because I didn't actively open up about it until a bit later on. So, but I think about the conversations that I've had with friends talking about that stuff, which got them to open up. Yeah, well, my wife and I had these problems, or I didn't know what to do with my job, or I got laid off and somebody was in the restaurant industry or what have you. So I would assume there's probably a lot more of those conversations that really need to be had, but really aren't being had. So I'm glad that you wrote that book.
Yeah. How did it work out in the end?
Oh, great. We got a divorce, and I found my partner, my match, the love of my life. And it's a beautiful thing. I mean, sometimes you got to walk through the crazy shit to be able to find the right thing for you. And it's not always easy to do it. I remember it took me probably 2 years to be able to actually grow the pair of balls to be able to say, I think we really need to talk about some shit that we haven't talked about in a while. And there were even times back in 2017, 18, where I was suicidal in my own company. I built 40-foot walls around me, and I didn't know how to get out of it. And I thought the only way to get out of all of this was to just jump off the top of the condo building. And there were only 3 people that knew about that. And they were all friends. My wife at the time didn't even know about it. But I needed to talk through stuff. I needed to work through stuff. And I needed to do what you were saying. Like, I needed to work through my own shit the way that I talk to other people, and be able to actually work through it and have conversations with either therapists or coaches, or, you know, being mindful. Like in the pandemic, kind of sitting back and going, well, a lot of this sucks. Why does it suck? And why am I doing this? Why have I abandoned myself? Why have I done things this way? And how do I actually have these tough conversations, which in all reality has led to so much more life that has happened since then. And beautiful conversations that I get to have with my partner now, where there are times where I'm like, all right, what just happened triggered my trauma. Here's what I feel. Here's what I'm thinking. And this would have terrified me to fucking talk about this before, because these things would have happened. And for the most part, she's just like, cool, well, that's not how I am, but we can talk about all this stuff and we can work through all of it. But being able to actually sit down, become aware of it, and figure out what the inventory is. I work with coaching clients and people through my program of hitting the reset button and being able to understand how you can become aware of those things, and actually figuring out what the shit has happened, what happened to you in the past, and how it's accumulated now. But those conversations, like you're talking about in your book, I feel like a lot of people need to still have those conversations. We are somewhat back to normal, but we shouldn't just bypass everything. It's interesting because I'm watching some show I think has been out for years at this point, called A Million Little Things. And it's sort of similar to like what you're talking about. One friend committed suicide in the beginning of the show, and they all kind of band together, and they've been through a lot of crazy shit. But I just reached the point, I don't know, a few days ago, where the pandemic has hit, and they're talking about these things that are actively going on within the pandemic. And it was weird to me, because here we are in 2023. If I see somebody with a mask, I think maybe they're just compromised. Maybe they have somebody at home that's compromised, or they have something that's going on, but it's not the norm like it was then. But those tough conversations still need to be fucking had. And I don't think a lot of people are actually having them.
I mean, just thank you so much for sharing that. Just hearing your story just makes me realize how many of those tough conversations you have to have, not just with with your partner, you have to have a therapist, then you have to have friends around you. And I've got a couple of friends they went through a divorce, and I know that it's not left them in a good place. It's so much so that they can't even get on the phone with me to talk. So that kind of worries me. And it's true where there's a way when we start getting busy again, we all pretend, and then we start getting busy. Oh, I've got this work. And then all of a sudden we carry on, and there's just so many layers that you have to uncover to actually start to do the healing. And I'm so happy now that you have a partner where you should be able to voice those things. Because
Yeah.
a big part for me, let me not speak for all men. I never realized until I got married where I didn't even understand certain emotions that I had.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't even understand the emotions, you can't even call it out to share with anyone.
Yeah.
Because you don't even know what it is that you're feeling. And that's just no way to live your life. And
Yeah.
I do hope that people do realize, like, the pandemic, I never wish the pandemic on anyone, but I do feel like if you try to look at the silver lining in it, it was a great bit where we all stopped and had to like take a look at ourselves and start to really ask ourselves some tough questions. And I still feel like what you said, there's still so much trauma and so many more conversations we have to have. So I don't want everybody to just go back into that busy and just pretend it didn't happen.
It's like a bandage. People just put a bandage on top of a bandage on top of a bandage on top of a bandage, and then they have to go back through all those layers, and it's difficult for people to do it. It makes sense why people do it. I've done stuff like that before where it's like, oh, well, I'll just kind of work on this project, or I'll work on this client, or I'll work on this thing, I'll do this thing or whatever. And you're just bypassing and like deflecting and trying to get away from the stuff instead of actually going through and doing the work. It's fucking tough. It's hard to really do the work. But having somebody else there, coaching or a therapist or even a good friend, you should be able to talk to your spouse or partner or whatever, but you shouldn't actually put everything on that person to expect 100%. Them to fix everything. It's just a matter of actually being able to voice it at least, and then be able to say, all right, here's what I'm going to do, and be able to work from there, or ask questions. Like I have times where people are like, this is what I'm going through, and honestly, I don't know what the fuck to do. What can I do? Because then at that point, they're at least open instead of just being like, I'm just upset, I'm pissed, I'm going to go work on this thing because I don't want to think about it, or I'm going to go drink, or I'm going to go do whatever. And it can be difficult. I found for me personally, I drank a lot more. I remember my ex-wife saying, as we got closer to a divorce, she was like, wow, you're drinking a lot more these days. And I remember thinking like, fuck yeah, I am. Like, what the fuck? You fucking kidding me? Like, look at what's going on here. And then maybe a year and a half later or so, I put the bottles down. I was like, I'm done, because that's not who I want to be. And I had bandaged myself with a lot of that. And I tried to do the work, but the work was being clouded by me just going, oh, fuck it, I'm just going to go get a glass of scotch and then start to work on something else. But once you start to peel away the bandage, you can start to kind of work on the other ones. And sometimes it just takes taking that first step to be able to do that. So on that note, what sort of advice would you give to somebody that's on their path towards self-mastery?
On their path towards self-mastery, I think it's just listening from what you just said is having that courage to take the bandage off and see what is there. Because there's nothing worse than trying to hide from the truth in yourself. And I think wherever you are, just have that courage to see what's there, but don't try and solve it on your own. So start, like, when your friends ask you how you're doing, they do actually care and actually want to hear an answer. So sometimes just have a bit of faith and share and see what happens. Can't be worse than just keeping it in your head.
Yeah.
And then start to surround yourself with trusted, because this was something when I was in the UK, we didn't really talk to therapists or coaches or things like that. And this is something I feel like you should be talking to therapists, not because something's wrong. Yeah. Just literally, you should have somebody who that's their skill set. That's what they do. You should have a coach that you talk to, because you want to make sure that there's no hidden trauma or there's no bandages that you're putting on top. Yeah. So that you can show up as your best self for your loved ones. So that should be something you should be investing in. And that's for me, one of the reasons I wrote the book is like, same way we go to the gym and we spend so much money on physical fitness, is like, you should have a therapist that you talk to, not because anything's wrong, but because you want to be a better person. You want to make sure that you're not just having conversations with yourself. You should have a coach that you talk to where when you want to take action and behavior change, that shit is not easy. Can't do it on your own. So then you should have your friends that you speak to, and you generally, not just to go and talk about sports and don't get me wrong, talking about sports is cool as well, but you should also have your friends where from time to time you get together and you actually share what the hell is going on and what's wrong. Because I've had situations where when you have it in your head, it becomes such a big issue. But once you share it with your friends, you're like, okay, it wasn't the end of the world. You could start taking steps to solve it. So that's one tip I'd love to leave for people, self-mastery.
That's a great way to put that too. And just being able to have conversations. I think there are a lot of people that get afraid of being able to share with their friends or family that they're going through some stuff because they expect that they will not be understood. And I know that's how I've been. I'm a big fan of the Enneagram. I'm a 4 and I'm hyper emotional and think I'm a unicorn and all that sort of shit. So there have been times where I'm like, they won't get it because they don't understand me. But I've had conversations. I remember telling my dad and my brother at one point, like, hey, I was suicidal when I lived in Portland. They were like, why didn't you talk to us? I'm like, I didn't think I could. They didn't shame me for it, but they were like, man, you can always fucking talk to us. Even if we don't know what to say, we're going to love you through it. And a lot of friends are going to be the same way.
Yeah.
So, man, I
wanted to just, that point you just raised, because I actually had a friend who recently said when she lost her dad, she went through it and she tried to talk to people and they didn't respond the right way. And I think sometimes people feel like they have to do something. Sometimes you don't literally have to do anything. You just have to listen.
Yeah.
And it's only when the people who are going through that issue, they will tell you what they need. But I think sometimes people get so scared that they when you share something with them, they're like, oh my God, you've just shared with me that you're suicidal. What am I supposed to do? It's like, first of all, is just don't judge the person, just listen. And then as you're listening, that's the first step. And then they can start to take it from there.
Yeah. Wow. We could probably just keep going with the episode with that, because I think about people where they will judge because they may be feeling that. And you just called it out. They're like, oh, fuck. What do I do? What do I say? There's a whole lot that we can go through, but I feel like people need to read your book. They need to go through that. They need to have the conversations. And if they have questions for you, Chinazom, where can people find you and where can they connect with you?
Yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. So you just put Chinazom Sunny Nwabueze. You can also, my website is www.dreamcatchersperformance.com. So you can go on there, message me, chat. I'm also on Instagram, Dreamcatchers_performance. I'd love to, if you want to reach out to me, I'd love to talk with people. Could talk about my book all day.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Nick. This has been a pleasure. Thank you.